Welcome to the next edition in this series of questions and answers brought to you from Women in Residential Property. The aim of this series of videos is to answer some of the really common questions that we all have but might be afraid to ask about some fairly essential components of a residential property transaction. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Hunter and Kelly Wilson of Dual Asset Underwriting, and we're going to talk all about legal indemnity insurance. Before we start with the questions, Sam, would you just like to introduce yourself, please, and just give us a very brief introduction to Dual Asset as well?
Hi, my name is Samantha Hunter, and I'm head of online here at Dual Asset. So I head up the team who support our online comparison site in terms of kind of bespoke policies. Dual was founded just under 10 years ago, and we cover a wide range of indemnity insurance and worldwide. But essentially, I work in the team that does the online comparison site, and that was set up about 6 years ago.
Lovely. And Sam, we're talking mainly about residential today, but do Dual do commercial legal indemnity insurance as well?
We certainly do. So our actual comparison site does include indemnity insurance for both residential and commercial transactions. And then we have a wider team who cover development and M&A deals, whether, share sales and mergers and acquisitions of companies, and then lots of indemnity insurance worldwide for many different risks.
Thank you for that introduction, Sam. That was great. Kelly, this is actually the second Women in Residential Property Q&A you've done, but you've changed roles since the last one. So if you could just introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks for having me back. Kelly Wilson, and I'm a business development executive at Dual Asset, newly formed team brought on to increase the dual asset proposition throughout the UK.
That's brilliant, Kelly. Thank you very much. So let's start with an explanation of what legal indemnity insurance actually is, please.
Okay, so legal indemnity insurance is pretty simple. It's an insurance policy which will protect the homeowner or the lender, whoever is insured, against financial loss as a result of title defects. So in its kind of most simplest form, imagine, you're buying a property, they've had an extension, they haven't had the required planning permission, that's a title defect. Perhaps there's covenants on the title, those have been breached, that's a title defect. So the insurance policy was designed as a kind of an alternative to perhaps formal rectification. Sometimes it's too timely, sometimes you just can't rectify the title defect. So insurance is a really nice alternative to step in really and cover financial loss. It's indemnity based, so it's designed to put the insured back in the position they would have been had the issue not have arisen.
Okay, that's a really useful introduction. You've mentioned there are a couple of examples of what it might cover. So I think the example you gave was the extension where the planning permission's not quite right. What are some other common issues that legal indemnity insurance might address, and perhaps also some less common ones?
So I'll step over to Kelly. Oh, sorry, is that my question?
Yeah.
Sorry, Kelly. I'm doing number two. Sorry. So some of the more common and the more cost-effective policies are things like building regulations or chancel. They are very, very cheap. So if a property doesn't have the required building regulations for works that have undertaken, the policy is issued on a set number of conditions. So it will say, well, as long as you can meet these conditions, the policy will sit there usually forever. So they can range from very simple building regs, chancel, access issues. If there's not the adequate easement to get to and from the property, it will cover that. It can go into some more it can get as complicated as you like. We get some very weird and wonderful requests. Sometimes people will say, I'm not allowed to keep chickens at the property. I'd like to have chickens at my property in the future, so I'm going to breach the covenants. Can you cover me? So there's some weird and wonderful examples of things that it might cover. Things like defects and leases, they can be quite tricky to resolve. So if you've got a whole block of flats and you found a defect in your lease, you can imagine a landlord's probably not going to want to spend the time or the money always having to go in and rectify your lease, especially because it might mean that they then have to rectify all the other leases in the block if they're going to change yours, or it just isn't really cost effective for them, or they just don't feel it's defective. So it covers a whole host. We have on our portal currently about 55 products that we offer as standard, and then bespoke is hundreds, thousands. So yeah, it covers a whole massive range of defects. Anything, we will consider any defect on its merits.
And am I right in thinking that the defect is identified by the conveyancer during the conveyancing process?
Yes, so usually it comes as a remortgage or a sale or purchase. The conveyancer will carry out their due diligence, and as part of that, they will carry out searches. They will also look at the answers to inquiries that the seller has provided. There's a set number of forms that sellers will have to complete in order to sell the property, and the buyer solicitors will check over the title to the property. They will get that information usually from the land registry. Most properties are registered now, so they'll be provided with the information from the land registry, the forms completed by the seller, and the searches, and they will go through all of that and identify any defects usually, and then they will be raised with the seller's solicitors in order to answer, and that's usually where it kind of crops up.
And a quick bonus question for you, Sam, if I may. Do you typically get these issues arising on older properties, or can you have problems with new builds? Or is there any sort of pattern to when you might need one of these policies or have one of these issues?
No, so we do a range of products which are specifically for new builds. So imagine you're buying a property from a big developer. The sewers and the roads have to be or will be adopted by the council. But if you've got a huge development, you've got lots of phases, those agreements might not be in place quite yet, or they might, it's just too soon, or they're just not adopted as yet. And therefore you've got a defect. And if you've got a lender, which most conveyancers will know, if you've got a mortgage lender, they will not lend you the money until they are satisfied that their money is protected. So we do have a range of products which are specifically for new build properties, and some of those adoption kind of style policies will pick up if the roads don't get adopted. Then we will step in if the council approach the owner and say, well, look, we need to carry out these works, we want this amount of money from you. So as long as all the conditions of the policy are met, then that's what the policy is designed to do. So you get those ones for the new builds, and they just, some properties, as soon as you do something without, required consent for covenants, or you don't quite get all your building regs or what have you, a defect is created. So yeah, no, there's no pattern. I think on average it's estimated about 60%, over 60% of transactions will require some kind of indemnity insurance.
Wow, I'm really surprised. That's quite high. So Kelly, who buys the insurance, and how do they actually buy it? I mean, I think a lot of us, from the point of view of being a consumer, we're used to sort of going onto moneysupermarket.com or something and buying a household insurance policy. I'm guessing that's probably not how Legal Indemnity is bought.
Yeah, that's correct. It works slightly different. So indemnity policies are obviously usually for the benefit of the property owner. So whether this being an incoming purchaser or the owner in the case of a remortgage, they can be purchased by either the buyer or the seller. The seller often pays for the policy, as Sam alluded to earlier, obviously at the end of the transaction, trying to kind of get something through rather than rectifying the title. In a domestic house purchase, generally the solicitors would purchase the policy on behalf of the buyer or seller as part of the conveyancing process. So no, we wouldn't go onto a supermarket as a general member of the public. The solicitor will do that on our part.
Okay, so quick recap. So that the solicitor or the conveyancer identifies the problems. They would then recommend to the seller or that the seller needs to buy this legal indemnity policy to address potentially this issue should a loss arise in the future for the subsequent purchaser. Is that broadly correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they come to you as insurers to buy the correct policy.
Absolutely, yeah. Solicitors will come either via our portal, or as Sam mentioned earlier, if it's not a general risk, then they may need a bespoke policy, so they'll go direct to the underwriting team.
Okay. And how long does it take to arrange this type of insurance?
So standard title insurance policies, so this can include policies covering multiple risks, so there could be multiple defects on the title, They can be ordered within minutes via a portal such as ours at Dual Asset. We call it My Legal Indemnity Shop, which the solicitors would go on to. And in fact, it acts very much like, as you mentioned earlier, when you're buying your home insurance, you can get multiple quotes in one place within seconds. So it's really great for the solicitor and obviously their clients to obtain those quite quickly. More complex and bespoke policies can take a little bit longer, depending on the level of cover and the considerations to the risk by the insurer. For example, any risk that cannot be obtained as standard through the portal would be referred to the underwriter for deeper consideration, as Sam mentioned earlier. And certainly here, each case is judged on its own merits to see if a solution can be found, and hopefully a solution can be found to rectify the problem.
So the point you made there, Kelly, so you're actually offering choice on your portal, is that correct? So if a conveyancer comes onto your portal, there might be 2 or 3 products they could get to cover a particular defect, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. In some cases it's up to 4. We are actually quite unique in the market that we are the only title indemnity provider that does offer that multiple choice, in one click of a button. So it's a really great tool for us, and a really great tool that the market should be looking at, really, just to save time and give their clients more choice. And obviously there's regulations around that I'm sure you might want to move on to.
That segues neatly. I was going to ask about that. So Sam, does a lawyer or conveyancer have to get multiple quotes, or can they just go with one quote from one insurer? Or
so the IDD directives were laid down in 2018, and they don't say you have to get more than one quote. It's up to the lawyer, as with all these kind of compliance companies. It's up to the lawyer to interpret how they go about treating their clients fairly. So all these principles were set down, which most conveyancers are aware of. So treating clients fairly, acting in the client's best interests, that kind of thing. And so as long as they feel that they are abiding by that, then they're fine. I think the issue comes that, I think it's probably harder to say that you're treating your clients fairly and you're acting in their best interest if you're only going to one provider. It is easier to show you're complying if you're getting a choice of quotes, but obviously if you're having to go to different people to get different quotes, that's time. A lot of conveyancers just don't have the time, or that we know that conveyancers in the last couple of years have been under a lot of pressure. There's been so many transactions to get through, so time is always of the essence. So I would say that in terms of our portal, we offer quotes from up to 4 different insurers. And they are all independently priced by the insurer, and they all have the same wording. So there's definitely benefits to kind of using one portal where you can kind of get it all done in one go. But it's up to the lawyer really to decide how they comply with those directives that were set down.
And sorry, can I just make sure I've understood that point? So they all have the same wording. So the lawyer hasn't got to distinguish between policy coverage under this policy and policy coverage under another policy.
Correct. So what they will do is, it's not like kind of car insurance where you're having to go to each different provider and what do they cover. So what you will usually get is a nice quote summary. So the actual main policy wording and all of the insured events and things like that, that will all be the same. But the way they're independent is they might say, well, one provider might say, well, I'm going to only do this risk for the lender, but the other 3 will cover the owner. One of them might say, well, I would like to put an excess on this particular risk because that's my risk appetite. The other providers may not put the excess on, and some of them will have limited and unlimited legal fees, which can be important depending on the risk you're kind of insuring. So they are independent, they are independent quotes, but you haven't got to sit through, it's one policy document for all of them, and obviously the premiums will differ depending on who you go with. They're all A rated, so it's all got their ratings on and whatnot. So,
and A rating being a reference to their financial rating.
Correct, yeah. So they're all at least A rated by either Standard & Poor or AM Best.
Lovely. Okay. And how much does it cost?
Good question. Type insurance policies obviously vary in cost. I think there's a bit of a theme here where we've talked about kind of standard policies versus bespoke and more complex risks. So they really can start from £10, and they can go up to thousands of pounds depending on the property values and obviously the risk that the policy is covering.
Sorry, an extra question for either of you, if I may. You, I think, said at the beginning that the aim of the policy is to restore the purchaser to the position they otherwise would have been in. So what does that actually mean? Is it addressing the diminution in value of the property, or does it mean something else?
So essentially, it's a number of things, and each insurance provider will have a list of what they call, losses that they will pay out for. But on the whole, across the market, as a general kind of rule, if you like, it will cover loss in value to the property if the situation can't get rectified. And again, I always use a kind of an extension as a nice example. If you're buying a property with an extension, the local authority come along and they say, no, that's got to come down, we're not going to give you planning permission for that. And obviously if all the conditions of the policy have been met and the claim is made, obviously, the insurer will probably maybe try to get it rectified. That's probably the cheaper option for them. So they will try and pay for the rectification costs. If there's kind of any maybe rectification kind of works that need to be undertaken for the local authority to agree to leave the extension up, then that will be covered. So kind of monies to third parties, enforcement fees and things. But worst case, if that situation cannot be rectified, then yes, it would cover like loss in value. So if that extension had to come down, then that would, depending on obviously the surveyors, usually the surveyor involved, they will value it with and without the extension and what have you. So yes, it would cover the loss in value if that extension in that particular example couldn't be kept.
Okay, and the legal fees that might be incurred in trying to I don't know, find a solution to the challenge?
Yeah, it covers all the legal fees. So depending on whether the insurer has limited or unlimited legal fees, I think it's quite important for kind of conveyancers and people to be aware of whether the legal fees are limited or unlimited. And the kind of a very simple distinction is that if you've got limited legal fees, any of those legal fees that are paid out in order to deal with the claim, they are usually deducted from the policy amount prior to any loss being paid out to the insured, whereas unlimited legal fees are paid out separately, so they do not touch your policy amount at all. So definitely I would say to kind of, if there's a consumer who's watching this, definitely speak to your legal advisor about whether you should get limited or unlimited legal fees. And if you're a conveyancer and you're not quite sure, definitely speak to your insurance provider. We can't tell you what to do, but we can certainly kind of tell you how it works, and then it's really down for the legal advisor to decide whether they feel that a policy with unlimited is better for their client than limited. So,
and claims, how often do claims actually occur? Because you said earlier that sort of 60% of properties will have some kind of issue that would require legal indemnity insurance, but how often do these problems actually materialize? And could you give some examples of recent claims that you've seen?
Yeah, so I don't have the figures in front of me in terms of how many claims we've had, say, in the past year, but I would say certainly hundreds for residential properties. They are more common than I think people would imagine. As an ex-conveyancer myself, I have to say I was surprised at how many claims we do actually get. And sometimes they can be very, very simple and they're dealt with quite swiftly. Sometimes they are a bit more kind of in-depth. So we've got one kind of ongoing claim for a residential property at the moment where, again, it's for building regulations. They had, the policy was covering a wood burner. The wood burner had been installed without building regulations. The policy was put on risk back a couple of years ago, and about 8 months after the policy was incepted, the local authority turned up and said, we understand that you have carried out works, internal works and some other works that haven't got building regulations and compliance. You don't have certification. It turns out the neighbour had decided to contact the council, which does quite often happen. So they contacted the council and said, oh, this person's done all these works. And so therefore the policy conditions have been met, and so that was picked up by us. So we are currently in kind of contact with the council. We're just waiting for a full list of the works that they expect that need to have the certification that doesn't have. So although the policy was put on risk just for the wood burner at the time, the policy that was taken from the website covers any and all alterations that were carried out kind of 8 months prior to the policy commencement date. So essentially, you know, they've come in and they've said, oh, actually, there might be some more works that should have had building regulation certification that don't. So for us, we've currently put a reserve out of £5,000 for the actual any rectification works and costs for the council, and about £10,000 for legal fees. So the reserve on that is about £15,000 for a policy that cost under £60. So it, you know, that's the kind of cost that you're looking at potentially with those. And it was through no fault of the insured's, you know, no fault of their own. It was just a neighbour who decided they thought they would get involved. So yeah, that was quite a big one.
Can I just a point or question that I'd like to raise? Am I correct in thinking, and I'll try and give some context to this. So I'm in a couple of Facebook groups for the owners of listed properties, and very, very often you see questions on there about somebody's thinking about buying a listed property and they've discovered that consent hasn't been gained for some alterations that have been made to that property. And one of the questions that comes up quite a lot is if the council are aware that consent hasn't been gained, they couldn't get a legal indemnity policy. Is that correct? Does it have to be an unknown issue, if that makes sense?
So good question, and it does come up quite a lot, that we do get sort of solicitors who ask us this question quite a lot. So to get a standard policy, you would generally have to have had no contact and the local authority are not aware. So for your kind of standard pricing, if you like, an off the peg policy, generally that would be no contact. We do have people refer to us where there has been contact, or there's been potentially, you know, a breach potentially of some, they might have had listed building consent or planning consent, but there's been a breach of it because they haven't quite followed the conditions, etc. So those are considered. We will consider contact with whoever that is. It could be the owner of an access way, it could be, you know, the local authority, whomever could take enforcement action or kind of challenge the insured under the policy. Whoever that is, we will consider it, but again, it's just looked on its merits. Really, it would be something that an underwriter would essentially look at and see how we felt, and they would assess it on behalf of the insurers and decide whether we could cover that and on what terms. So
that's a really useful response, and very interesting that you mentioned in the example of the claim you gave that it was a neighbour who had alerted the council, because I do see that quite a lot in this Facebook group where somebody's got very angry that somebody's altered a listed property and they've immediately alerted the council or something like the conservation officer in a conservation area. So I suspect those matters aren't as uncommon as people might think. Any other examples of claims, perhaps something a little bit more unusual maybe?
So I've got one actually that I looked at for access. So I picked access because again, it's quite a common policy that people take out, but actually the claim is quite unusual. So the policy was put on risk in June 2022. It was for a rear access way, so not the main access way to the property, but like a rear access way that they used, I guess, for just getting to the back garden and what have you. So the policy put on risk, all on standard terms, no problem with that. Then 2 months later, we got notified of the claim, and it turns out that the owner of the accessway, who was kind of, I guess, a few doors down, they suddenly put a gate upon the accessway, they put security there, they put CCTV there, and said, right, no one is accessing down this without my permission. So of course the claim came in, and it transpires that actually our immediate neighbour had been in dispute with this access owner for quite a long time about the use of the accessway. So unbeknownst to the insured and unbeknownst to us, there was, you know, a dispute already ongoing. I think the neighbours already spent quite a lot of their money on trying to fight this, and it doesn't look like they're going to be successful. The access owner seems to be very unreasonable. So with that one, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get any kind of easement over that accessway. So at the moment, we are getting some valuations from I believe 2 surveyors to talk about loss and value. So that will be paid out probably on loss and value, because it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get the neighbours to be reasonable anytime soon. So quite an easy policy, but quite an unusual claim.
Mm.
They're both really interesting examples. Thank you. So just to sort of briefly recap what the benefits of legal indemnity insurance, if we could.
So I would say that, you know, the main benefits are where it's just not possible to rectify your legal issue. You know, if you've had an extension up for several years, you know, the chance of enforcement is generally quite low. But the problem you've got is that there is a defect there, and it's unlikely you're going to be able to, you know, perhaps go back to the council and have that rectified. You know, you've got lenders involved who, you know, will not lend unless their money is absolutely safe. So the benefits of a legal indemnity policy is essentially very timely. It's generally very cheap. They most of the time last in perpetuity. They will cover the current owner of the property. They will cover usually all of your successors forever. So it's a really cheap, effective way to plug those defects, and will indemnify fully the insured if that kind of does come, you know, if the doomsday happens. And you know, for the conveyancer themselves, I would say that, you know, again, it's time saving. You know, when you've got a client who's desperate to complete, as most people are, you know, do you want to be spending, you know, potentially weeks, months trying to find somebody to consent to this extension that someone's built on their property? Or, you know, essentially, do you, you know, get a reasonably priced policy which will cover the owner if that person comes along and says, well, actually, I benefit from those covenants and you've breached them. You know, for the conveyancer, it's peace of mind. It meets, you know, usually the lenders are very, very aware of indemnity insurance. Quite a lot of the time, they will, in the actual in the CML, it's not the CML handbook anymore, it's the UK Finance Handbook now. It was CML when I was a conveyancer, but the UK Finance Handbook, you know, they will say, I will accept indemnity insurance in lieu of this, of the rectification of this defect. So it is widely accepted, you know, by lenders and other, you know, entities as very acceptable to plug these defects.
And just as a final question, if a conveyancer has got a query or there's something they're not certain about in relation to legal indemnity insurance, can they give either you or Kelly a call and just ask a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, certainly. We have a telephone number on our website. We have a live chat option. So a lot of people go on the live chat and just say, I've got a quick query about this cover. They can have the live chat as transcript sent to themselves. So they can cover that off if they need to put something on their file. They can email us. Yeah, we're very accessible. Always happy to chat through with conveyancers.
Yeah, and I think you guys, obviously you regularly come to Women in Residential Property events, but I think you're often at the Conveyancing Association conference as well, are you?
Yes, we are, yeah.
So plenty of opportunities for conveyancers to meet you throughout the year.
Absolutely, and on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, if anybody does need to get in touch, please do so.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Kelly. Thank you very much, Sam. It was a really, really insightful conversation. And I would urge anybody out there with any questions or anybody who needs assistance with legal indemnity insurance to contact the team at Dual. And thank you very much for listening.